There's a wall in the Valley of the Kings that thousands of tourists photograph every single day. It's painted with golden figures, gods escorting a young king into the afterlife. Most people walk right past it. They snap a photo, they move on, they never look twice. But hidden behind that painted plaster is something that shouldn't exist. A void. An empty space the size of a room that no ancient record mentions, that no excavation ever opened, and that the Egyptian government scanned 3 separate times before quietly burying the results. This is the story of Tomb KV62, the tomb of Tutankhamun, and the scan that turned the most famous burial on Earth into the biggest unanswered question in modern archaeology. The tomb was discovered in 1922 by Howard Carter, buried under workmen's huts in the Valley of the Kings near Luxor, Egypt. For over 3,000 years, it sat untouched, its entrance hidden under rubble and debris from later tombs cut into the same hillside. When Carter broke through and held his candle to the gap, he said he could see wonderful things. Gold, thousands of objects, a boy king buried with everything he would need for eternity. But here is the detail nobody questioned for almost a century. Tutankhamun's tomb is small. Strangely, impossibly small. Every other pharaoh of his dynasty was buried in a sprawling complex of corridors and chambers cut deep into the rock, long descending passages, multiple halls, side rooms stacked with treasure. Tutankhamun, a king of the 18th dynasty, was crammed into 4 cramped little rooms that look more like a private noble's grave than a royal burial. For decades, scholars explained this away. He died young, around 19. His death was sudden. They didn't have time to finish a proper tomb, so they rushed him into a smaller one. Case closed. But that explanation has a problem. And the problem is the walls. If you find buried history as unsettling as I do, subscribe and turn on the bell. Because what was found behind those walls is the kind of thing that gets discovered, announced to the world, and then never spoken of again. In 2015, a British Egyptologist named Nicholas Reeves was studying high-resolution laser scans of the burial chamber. These weren't ordinary photographs. They were millimeter-precise surface maps, made to document every crack and brushstroke in the painted plaster. And as Reeves examined the scans of the north and west walls, he saw something underneath the paint. Straight lines. Faint, geometric, unnaturally regular. The kind of lines you only get from a doorway that was cut, filled in, and plastered over. Not one hidden doorway. 2. Reeves proposed something that sounded insane to the academic world. He argued that Tutankhamun's tomb wasn't built for Tutankhamun at all. It was the outer section of a much larger tomb. And the chambers sealed behind those plastered walls, he believed, belonged to someone buried before him. Someone whose tomb was reopened, partitioned, and reused when the boy king died unexpectedly. He had a name for who was behind that wall. Nefertiti, the queen whose burial place has never been found. For decades, scholars dismissed the idea of hidden chambers as wishful thinking. Egyptologists had been crawling through KV62 since 1922. How could anyone miss entire rooms? But Reeves wasn't guessing. He was reading the scan, and the scan showed what human eyes standing in the chamber could never see. So the Egyptian authorities did the only thing that could settle it. They brought in radar. Here's where it gets strange. In November of 2015, a Japanese radar specialist named Hirokatsu Watanabe arrived at the tomb with ground-penetrating radar equipment. He scanned the north and west walls, and when the data came back, the then Antiquities Minister stood in front of the world's press and made an announcement that sent a shock through archaeology. He said they were 90% certain there was something behind the walls. 2 empty spaces, and inside them, the radar suggested the presence of both metal and organic material. Organic material, the technical phrase used when you are being careful not to say the word body. The world went electric. The lost queen, hidden treasure. A second chamber sealed for 3,000 years inside the most famous tomb in history. And then, almost immediately, the story began to come apart in a way that is far more suspicious than any clean discovery. Because a second scan was ordered, and the second scan said nothing was there. In 2016, a team from National Geographic ran their own radar survey. Their results were inconclusive. They couldn't confirm the chambers, and they couldn't confirm the lines Watanabe's machine had drawn so confidently. The disagreement between the two surveys was total. One said, empty rooms full of metal and organic remains. The other said, solid rock. Two machines, the same wall, completely opposite answers. That alone should have triggered an open, transparent third investigation. Instead, what happened next is the part that keeps this story alive. They ran a third scan, and the third scan vanished. In 2018, a team from the University of Turin in Italy conducted what was described as the most thorough radar survey yet. Multiple frequencies, multiple angles, the most advanced equipment brought to the tomb so far. And at a conference, the conclusion was delivered in the flattest possible language. There was no evidence of hidden chambers, no corridors, no doorways, nothing behind the walls but stone. So that's it then. Mystery solved. 3 scans, and the final, most sophisticated one says the walls are solid. Except that conclusion has a problem too. Several of them. Because the Turin team never fully published the raw data that the rest of the scientific community could examine independently. The most important radar survey in the history of Egyptology, the one that supposedly closed the case forever, was announced as a result and then left without the underlying scans for outside experts to verify. You are asked to trust the conclusion without seeing the evidence. And in a field where careers are built and destroyed over a single misread inscription, that silence is deafening. And then there are the lines on the wall. Because no radar survey, not the one that found chambers and not the one that found nothing, has ever explained away the straight geometric seams that Nicholas Reeves saw in the laser scans in the first place. The radar argued about what was behind the plaster. It never explained the unnatural doorways drawn into the surface of the plaster itself. Those lines are still there. You can see them in the scan data right now. Faint, regular, shaped exactly like blocked entrances. Now let's decode what that painted north wall is actually telling us. Because the wall isn't just hiding something physical. The art on it has its own anomaly, and it's one Egyptologists have argued about for 100 years. The north wall of the burial chamber shows 3 scenes. In one of them, a figure performs the opening of the mouth ceremony, the sacred ritual that reanimates the dead for the afterlife. The ritual is being performed on Tutankhamun, and the figure performing it is his successor, an elderly official named I, shown wearing the crown of a pharaoh. This is the first clue. For decades, it was read as nothing more than a standard funeral scene. But here's the problem. By the rigid rules of Egyptian funerary art, the living king performs that ritual for the dead king. So I is shown as pharaoh, burying Tutankhamun. Standard. Except, Reeves looked closer at the faces, and under the repainted plaster, he argued the features of the figures had been altered. The face originally carved there, he believed, was not Tutankhamun's. The scene had been recut. Someone was buried in this room before the boy king, and the walls were quite literally painted over to hide it. That's the first clue. The second is hidden in the plaster itself. In every other royal tomb of the period, the burial chamber walls were smoothed and finished with care. In KV 62, the north and west walls were prepared differently from the rest of the room. The plaster, covering the suspected doorways, sits over surfaces that don't match the surrounding rock face. The wall was treated, filled, sealed, the way you seal a passage you don't want anyone to follow. Mainstream Egyptology says this is just uneven ancient workmanship in a rushed burial. But rushed workmen don't carefully disguise a flat, deliberate seam and then paint a continuous mural across it to hide the join. That isn't haste. That's concealment. And the third clue is the strangest of all. It's the size and the orientation of the tomb itself. KV 62 is laid out wrong for a king. The entrance turns to the right, a layout associated in this period with queens, not pharaohs. The whole architecture suggests the tomb was originally designed for a royal woman, then adapted at the last minute for a male king who died before his own tomb was ready. 3 separate clues: the repainted faces, the disguised walls, the queenly architecture, each one explainable on its own. But together, they point in a single direction. That the 4 small rooms tourists photograph today are only the front porch of something larger, and that the rest of it is still sealed behind painted plaster, exactly where Reeves said it was. Now, does this prove there's a hidden queen entombed 3 feet behind the tourists in the Valley of the Kings? Probably not. The honest answer is that the radar evidence is genuinely contradictory, and the most advanced survey leaned toward solid rock. A grounded explanation exists, and it's still remarkable. It's entirely possible the tomb was reused, that it was originally cut for someone else and repurposed in a hurry. That the strange size, the wrong-handed layout, and the altered wall art all record a real ancient emergency: the unexpected death of a young king and the scramble to bury him in a space never meant for him. That alone rewrites the final chapter of the 18th dynasty. It means the most famous tomb on Earth is a recycled grave, and the boy we think of as the centerpiece was an afterthought shoved into someone else's eternity. But even that grounded version leaves the lines on the wall unexplained. It leaves 3 radar surveys flatly contradicting one another. It leaves the most important data unpublished. And it leaves the single most basic action undone. Nobody has drilled the wall. Think about that. We have the technology to fly probes past Pluto. We have the imaging to map every brushstroke in that chamber to the millimeter. And the question of whether 2 empty rooms sit behind a known wall in the most studied tomb in human history could be answered in an afternoon with a small hole and a fiber optic camera. It has not been done. The Egyptian Antiquities Authority has refused to allow the plaster to be touched, citing the need to protect the priceless paintings, which is reasonable, until you remember that those same paintings appear, according to the scans, to be sitting directly on top of the doorways everyone is arguing about. So the wall stays sealed, the data stays buried, and the official position settled into the most convenient answer of all. There is nothing to see. Move along. If this were a tomb nobody cared about, that silence would mean nothing. But this is Tutankhamun. This is the discovery that defined modern archaeology, that filled museums, that put Egypt on the front page of every newspaper in the world. If there is a hidden chamber behind that wall, it would be the most significant archaeological find since Carter himself broke through the rubble in 1922. And the people who control access to it have chosen 3 times now to scan it and look away. Here is what we know for certain. In 1922, a sealed tomb was opened, and it was too small for the king inside it. In 2015, a scientist read the laser scans and found doorways under the paint. In 2015, a radar machine said there were empty rooms behind those doorways, holding metal and organic remains. In 2016, a second machine said maybe. In 2018, a third said nothing, and then kept its data to itself. Every one of those facts is documented. Every one of them is real, and not one of them has been resolved. The painted north wall is still standing in the burial chamber of KV 62. The golden gods still escort the boy king into eternity. The faint straight lines are still there beneath the brushwork, regular and deliberate, shaped like a door that was filled in by someone who did not want it found. Thousands of tourists still file past it every day, photographing the most famous wall in the world, standing perhaps 3 feet from a room no living person has ever entered. It was scanned, it was announced, and then it was sealed back into silence. And it is still there, right now, waiting on the other side of the paint for someone to finally pick up a drill. If you want to see what's hiding behind the official story, watch the next investigation on screen now.